Hi, I'm Roger from Holistic Plan, and this video is ostensibly about the behavior and range calc of the new credits introduced by the American Rescue Plan Act from March 2021. But really, we're going to look very closely at just the material impact of some of these phase-outs on the tax bill. And you're going to see, I think, that we as a planning community really need to think very hard and look very closely at our clients' AGIs and try to massage those AGIs to make sure that we're not leaving massive amounts of money on the table. I should probably start this video with a disclaimer that just says there's going to be information in here that goes beyond just us looking at the software. And so don't use this video as tax advice or as a basis for giving tax advice to your clients. There could even be mistakes in here. And if there are, let me know. I erred on the side of getting this video out quickly because I wanted to make sure that some of these ideas were out there and the conversation is starting within the planning community to make sure that we're taking the right steps as early as possible on some of these AGI phase-outs. Okay, so with that said, let's dive in. We're going to start with the stimulus, the recovery rebate it's called. So it's really the stimulus checks, the $1,400 stimulus check per person. Most people probably, anyone who's eligible for it probably got it in 2020 got it based on 2020 or 2019 income. But there is a chance for clients who were not eligible in those years, they could become eligible in 2021. And let's look at the phase-outs real quick because that's going to impact the behavior of range calc. So here we've got the stimulus phase-outs. Married filing jointly, it starts to phase out at $150,000 AGI, totally phased out at $160,000. And you can go down the list, head of household, single, look at that, single $75,000 to $80,000. And in fact, let's drill down on that one in particular, all right? Because it's only a $5,000 window over which the entirety of that stimulus payment phases out. So let's look at this example. I'm going to have a single taxpayer, two dependents, right? So that's $1,400 times 3, $4,200 would be their stimulus check. But it phases out from $4,200 to $0 as AGI rises from $75,000 to $80,000. So think about that, because range calc, which we're going to look at in a second, that's showing you the marginal impact of just adding $1,000 at a time, adding extra income. And so if we move from $75,000 AGI to $76,000, we're moving from not phased out at all to basically 20% phased out. We increased AGI by $1,000, but our credit dropped by $840. And so if you look at the effective tax rate of that next $1,000 of income at that very tiny slice, from $75,000 to $76,000 AGI, you're in effect paying 84% on that last $1,000 at the margin of extra income. And in fact, if I switch over to range calc, that's what we see here. I see they're in the 22%. I set up a single taxpayer and I think I gave them $60,000 of wages. So their AGI is going to, oh yeah, that's right. Their AGI it's at $75,000 or $15,000 of additional income. Look at that. There's that 84. We rise from 22% effective tax rate on the next $1,000. Within that narrow $5,000 band, we're in effect for every $1,000 of income we add, we're paying more tax. We're paying more tax than we're even getting because it's 106% tax on that next $1,000 of income. And so that's why we got to be really, really careful if we're in this range of doing everything we can to keep AGI from getting up here. Now, if you're a client who's way above the threshold, you don't really need to worry about this AGI stuff. You've already passed it by. But if you're down here and you're eligible for that check, and one little Roth conversion or one little move, and we'll talk about some of the moves later in the video, that can make a big difference. 106% effective tax rate on that $1,000. Next, let's look at the child tax credit. Also has a phase out. It's not as dramatic as the one for the stimulus, but the child tax credit this year has two phase-out levels. There's one that happens, and here on screen, $150,000 for married filing jointly, $112,500 for head of household, $75,000 for single married separate qualifying widower. And you'll notice those are exactly the same starting points as the stimulus. Now, where do they phase out? Like, what's the end point? Well, the end point is actually different based on your situation, because my understanding is it phases out $50 for every $1,000 of AGI above these levels. And so if you've got a whole bunch of children, it takes longer to phase out $50 for every 1,000 than if you only got one kid. So the top end of it's a little bit different family by family, but the phase out starts there. The second phase out starts at 400,000 and 200,000, just like before. So let's take a look at that here on screen. This is what it looks like. So you've got, basically it's phasing out by 5% over and over and over for every $50 for every $1,000 basically that you add. That's that first phase out area. Then no impact, we've phased out the first chunk of child tax credit. But then we get to this second range. Once we get up to, this is a single taxpayer, so once they get to $200,000 AGI, we start to see that phase out again up until the point where there's no tax credit, there's no child tax credit at all anymore. So that's kind of an interesting one right there, these two steps of phase outs. One thing I'm going to show you, this is going to kind of blow your mind a little bit. I'm going to change the step size to 500, all right? And before I do that, let's think about what it might look like, all right? So right now we're stepping in groups of 1,000. And in fact, the way that the phase out is calculated is $50 for every $1,000 over the phase out level, all right? Well, think about that. Let's say that I step $1,000 up. Easy, that's going to step down $50. But let's say I step up $1,001. It's only $1 different. But now I've crossed into two $1,000 chunks, two $1,000 slices. And so in fact, I'm going to take $50 off for this one and $50 for the next one. Even though I was only $1 over, it's kind of these chunks of 1,000 that you take 50 off of. And so what's going to happen is you're going to see some funky pattern here. I'm going to rerun it. What you're going to see is for that, I'm doing a $500 step. So the first $500, it's going to show, yeah, you took $50 off. But the next $500 is still within the same $1,000 chunk. And so it actually doesn't have any incremental difference as far as phase out goes. So you're going to see, it's kind of hard. Let me narrow the width of this a bit to 100,000. You're going to see basically, yeah, this is crazy, but the first $500, as you step up in $500 increments, the first $500 is impacted, but then the next $500 is not, because again, we're walking in 1,000-hour increments. If I could take this all the way down to $1 increments, you would see a huge spike on that first dollar, and then the next $99, no difference. Because all it matters is if you get into that $1,000 range, you have to pay, or you get another $50 phase out. So it's kind of a nutty little artifact of the way that works. It's certainly going to be confusing to some people on range calc, and we're going to see it again in a second. So there you go. Next, let's look at dependent care credit. Dependent care credit is now a refundable credit in 2021. Just like with the child tax credit, there are two phase-out levels. What's interesting about dependent care is it's all the same, no matter what your filing status is, all the same phase-outs. So we've got this first phase-out where we take it from 50% down to 20%, and then the second phase out where you take it from 20% down to 0%. And so let's take a look at that. And by the way, that goes in $2,000 steps. So we're going to see something very similar to what we just looked at on the child tax credit. Here we go. This is the dependent care credit phasing out here in range calc. So this phases out at 125,000. So I was at 60,000. So at 65,000, that's when this thing starts. And because I'm using a $1,000 step size, and because dependent care uses a $2,000 step size for determining if you phased out a chunk or not, you've got this crazy sawtooth pattern that we just talked about on the on the child tax credit side. And you'll note, actually, let me expand the width of this. I'll go up to $500,000 of extra income, because I want to show you that there is indeed that second phase out level that happens at $400,000. There it is. So that's the dependent care credit. You've got your first phase out at $125,000. It's going to have a crazy sawtooth pattern to it. Well, let me change that. Actually, if I set this to $2,000, we can get rid of the sawtooth, right? Because then it'll be the same granularity. Let's take this down so we don't have it so huge. 300,000. Yeah, so dependent care has two phase out sections. It's going to have the sawtooth unless you want to set the step width to 2,000. Otherwise, just live with the sawtooth, and you'll have to try to explain that to your clients. But now, just imagine, I did all three of those in isolation, but the reality is all three of those credits are likely to impact your client at the same time. If they've got children, the dependent care thing is probably going to be there alongside the child tax credit. And if they are eligible for the 2021 stimulus, that's going to be alongside the others as well. And it will be impacted by the number of children. So let's take a look at that one. This is all three of those credits together. And we've got, you can see here I'm bumping along. Then I hit 89, which is 5% child tax credit phasing out, plus the 84% phase out of the stimulus. Then that stimulus fully phases out. Now I'm at 5% phase out of the child tax credit. Then the dependent care credit starts to phase out. So that's this. I've got 5 plus, 16? And remember, I've got that sawtooth pattern. Then the child tax piece has gone away. Then the dependent piece goes away. And then we get back to the child tax credit phase out over here. So imagine what is going to happen with our support desk when people see this range calc and they haven't watched this video. That is a crazy pattern to try to understand and try to explain to a client, but that's what's happening. And so that's why we have to be so careful this year with AGI, because it's going to have a huge impact at the margin for our clients. So what's the action plan here? Well, we have to look very closely at AGI. I've said that already. One thing we could do is you could flip back to the household screen here, and we can at least, if you've uploaded a tax return, you can at least see the AGI for the most recent tax return uploaded. So that might be a good way to kind of narrow it down to who's maybe on the border of one of these breakpoints. So that way you can at least narrow it down to who to take a closer look at. Then it's a game of trying to lower AGI. And we could, for example, if this client, a lot of your younger clients, you might be recommending they make Roth 401k contributions or Roth IRA contributions. Maybe we switch that to deductible contributions or before tax contributions this year, switching from Roth to before tax. If your client has Schedule C or Schedule E income, if they can push expenses or pull expenses into this year or push revenue out into next year, that could bring AGI down. There's the above the line charity, which has been derided as being kind of small. In 2021, it's a $600 above the line deduction if they take the standard deduction. Well, $600 could make a big difference if someone's right on the edge of one of these phase outs. And so that changes the math of itemizing or taking standard. And that's a totally new thing, like itemizing or standard having an impact on credits, like refundable credits all the way down the tax return. That's going to be a real challenge for software providers like us who have to figure out how to make sure that the software is guiding one way or the other as far as what to do, itemizing versus taking standard. And there's going to be other great ideas. We as a profession need to make sure we think through this, that we share all our bright ideas, and that we make sure that we spread the word too, because your client base may all be way above this AGI limit, but there's a lot of people who could really get caught with a gotcha if they don't make the right decisions this year around AGI, around avoiding those phase outs. So I think we as a planning community, we need to make sure to tell our colleagues about this. We need to tell our pro bono clients about this. We need to make sure that the word gets out that 2021 is the year to impact AGI the extent you can. Now, of course, that said, there's talk about some of these phase outs becoming a more permanent thing with a new tax law. And so then it's less of a story about pushing or pulling income in and out of one year, but trying to make more sustainable changes to how we save and how we manage our income. So that could happen, but as far as what we know now, 2021 is the year to get AGI as low as possible so we don't get hit with some of these phase outs.